Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I might like Mega Man X7. Okay, I don't know if I'm willing to commit to such a polarizing statement, but I definitely don't mind it as much as other people do. And while I think calling it one of the worst games of all time gives it way too much credit, that at least make it more interesting, I certainly didn't have a borderline okay time when I first played it. It took a lot of runs for that. All of those have let me pick up some tricks for having a more enjoyable experience with the game, and since I'm sure there are plenty of other people out there that'll probably end up giving X7 a try, I mean, you did buy the second collection and you played all the other X games, so why not? I have 10 tips so that things aren't quite as bad as they could be. As bad as you've been told it will be. Let's see how often I need to resort to jokes and how many are actual pieces of advice. Place your bets now. I'm gonna start you off with a weird one, and a lot of people might think I'm crazy, but play as Axl, as much as you can. If it comes down to the meta, he's probably the weakest, and the other two can hit harder in most situations, but I just tend to have a better time using the new kid. Probably the best way to explain it is that the movement is really rough in this game. You oftentimes feeling heavy and clunky, and it's super apparent with X and Zero. Since them having previous appearances, you have a direct line of comparison to how each should play. Axl is a blank slate though. You can't sit there and say, he played better in X4. He sets his own precedent. And if we can get away from whatever's below a backhanded compliment, the game also seems more designed for Axl. There's a lot of times where the glide is really helpful. He gets a few extra guns that can be fun to mess around with, especially the launcher, and he makes the most out of the game's lock-on feature. You could say this is true for both X and Zero as well, to a degree, but the weapons Zero gets feel pretty half-baked. X can glide with his armor, but it feels a little weird to use, plus, while you can rapid-fire with his buster, the main attraction is his charge shot, which means that it's important to fiddle with the lock-on to hit the right target, whereas with Axl, you're more encouraged to just go in, guns a-blazing. Plus, X isn't available from the get-go, probably to make sure you actually give Axl a try. He's also got a nifty transformation ability that is a pain to use, so I wouldn't recommend it unless it's for a specific upgrade. He's also hands down the best choice if you're here for the story, though I'm not sure if many will care. If you do though, whoever enters the boss arena gets some extra dialogue with the waiting Maverick. X mostly just whines about how fighting is wrong while pointing a gun at their head, while Zero just seems like he doesn't want to be there, which, fair. But Axl, since the bosses are his old teammates, gets some kind of interesting back and forth, giving you a better look at the personalities of him and your opponents, with some insight into how Axl fit into Red Alert. About the only one I'd recommend talking to with someone else is Tunyon with X. To wrap things up, Axl feels like the only character they put any effort into. So while he may not be the most hard-hitting and using him certainly won't fix the level design, I still think he's the way to play. That's not to say that you shouldn't use anyone else. You get 2 characters per level and each has his own health bar. If one of them dies, that's it, you lose a life, no matter how raring to go the other was. So pay attention to your health. While that's kind of obvious and the sort of thing you should do in most games, because of what I've just explained, it's really important here. If you just try to recklessly tear through the game to get it over with, which I understand, you're likely to die when a quick swap could have gotten you over to the next checkpoint, or maybe even beat the level. So hey, give the game just enough respect to keep an eye on the upper corner of the screen, and you might avoid a rage quit. My third tip is to play something worse beforehand. If you want to consider this a gag suggestion, I wouldn't blame you, but before I did my first serious solo run of X7, I was playing something. And I hated it. Hated everything about it. It was a game that I felt compelled to play due to certain circumstances, but I just couldn't. I've kinda blanked out a lot of the details, but it was a title that had a few different playstyle options. I tried 3 of them, and every time, I wound up just rage quitting. I was at my limit. I wanted to play literally anything else, when I remembered that I also had X7 on my backlog, and I thought, why not? There's no way it could be any worse. And you know what? It worked. I won't lie and say that I had a great time, but it was at least okay. It's all about managing expectations. I wouldn't recommend anyone go out of their way to do this, but if you maybe find yourself in a situation similar to the one I just described, that might just be the perfect time to give X7 a spin. Just save it for a special occasion. I can't overstate the importance of power-ups. Some Reploids give you them for rescuing them. You get 2 per stage, so if you're thorough, that's a total of 16. And each of your 3 characters require 12. Oh boy. That makes your distribution super important, so looking up a chart and planning ahead is a good idea. Personally, I typically go all in on one character, powering up movement first, at least until I get the Hyper Dash, since that really improves how well they'll move. With how sluggish movement feels, this is always a big help for me at least. Other people though might get more out of the extra damage from the power category to kill bosses faster, or more iframes from the special category, and the last upgrade for each tends to be just kind of a neat bonus rather than something vital. So going for not quite max on 2 characters instead of focusing just solely on one might actually be a better idea. Give it a peek and figure out what works for you. Or, you know what? Can't you import save files on Steam? The game actually plays a lot better when you're at full power. So if you're on PC and can find save data from a trusted source, starting the game that way might actually be enough on its own to overshadow everything else I'm telling you to make this tolerable. If you're not doing that though, I would recommend a guide. You don't want to get all the way to endgame, realize that you needed just one more power up to outrun the tank, and have to figure out where you missed a Reploid holding one, or get stuck on red and have to backtrack for a sub-tank. While I understand wanting to experience the game organically, or having too much pride about not needing to look something up, save it for the rest of the X series. The goal here should just be to hit credits, so just follow a guide to cut down on backtracking. All the more so if you're going for all the Hunter medals. Make sure you have the right character for the job, and since X is probably the meta pick here, try to unlock him as soon as possible. You need to rescue half the Reploids to do so. Not only so you can have him on standby to wreck when you need him to, but also so that you can get his armor pieces the first time through a stage and maybe start upgrading him as well. In a similar vein, look up and exploit all the cheese you can find. I picked up a few myself. Like the bee copters in the first level have some major blind spots if you get right up on them, and the wolf enemies have a specific range where you can hit them without them noticing you. And I always jump up on Hyenard's mech while it's still in motion, not hitting it to get it to stop, though that one's a risky move. Killing him as fast as possible before he can cause you lethal mental damage is important though. The 2 big ones have to do with collectibles. The racetrack for Ride Borsky is presented as a level you're meant to speed through, you having a bunch of bombs to collect and only so much time to do so. However, if you just crawl around at a snail's pace, it makes it much easier to grab the bombs, rescue Reploids, even snag a tank, all while still having enough time to complete 2, maybe even 3 loops. Then there's the motion sensor bombs in Flame Hyenard's stage. You get close enough to them and it'll start a shrill series of beeps. Normally, there's a Reploid in its range, so if you don't rush to save them before it goes off, they'll die and you'll lose whatever they might have been holding for the whole run. Or, since the Reploids only spawn in once you're close enough, you can just retreat and wait for the bombs to explode while they're off screen, since it doesn't despawn them like it does the Reploids, and you still hear the beeping. Then just leisurely collect the civilians once the explosion is done. You can use this technique in Tornado Tunyon's stage as well, stopping in place when the Hermit Crab mech in the first half of the level is attacking so that you don't accidentally make a Reploid appear on one of its projectiles and immediately bite it. Those are the ones I've figured out, but I'm sure there's more shenanigans you can pull out there. If there are, please type it out in the comments. One day I'll be able to beat this game without actually playing it. Let yourself indulge in nostalgia where you can. It's an X title, so there's several familiar faces, and the first stage is even based on the intro highway from X1, along with several of the enemies found there. Zero can also knock back some projectiles with his sword, which is kind of like Ganondorf's Paliga attack in The Legend of Zelda. In fact, why not just pretend that you're playing a better game, like X1 or Ocarina of Time? That's gotta make things better. Or does that only make those games worse by association? Soldier Stone Kong has a funny red butt, and the weird, spinning laser wave whatevers make a silly noise that reminds me of Cartoon Network sound effects. So go ahead, have a laugh. You've earned it. Next, make sure you enjoy the good parts. Granted, there's not many of them, but there are 1 or 2 sections that give me a glimpse of what a 3D X game could and should have been. and if those sections had been cherry-picked and put on a disc as a demo, preferably with movement maxed out, I probably would have been genuinely excited. For me, it's Vanishing Gungaroos level and the second half of Crow Wings. It might be different for you, and there's a fair chance that you won't have any part of the game that gives you the same feeling, but if there is a section that makes you think, oh man, this could have been so cool, take a moment and just appreciate it. I don't think the premise of a 3D X game is inherently flawed, just this execution of it was. The last bit is just a general gaming tip, to just stop when you've reached your limit, whether that means taking a short break, letting it sit for an extended period of time, or just putting this down and never looking back. I certainly get your pride not wanting to let a crappy game beat you, wanting to say you played through all the games in one of your favorite series, or just collect all the achievements. Some games, though, are not worth your time. If it's mentally, physically, or emotionally hurting you, or you're just plain not having fun, it's better to simply quit. No one will judge you. Or if they do, they're probably a jerk that puts way too much importance on goals in what is supposed to be a leisure activity, and their opinions aren't worth listening to. So pace yourself and don't be afraid to duck out. This bit of advice isn't hypocritical, I'm just too stupid to listen to it. So there you go, 10 tips to make X7 a more tolerable experience, with only 2 of them being more joke answers. I think that's pretty admirable, and I feel like I should get some kind of reward for it. Then again, you could also accuse me of doubling up on some of them, since 3 in a row just basically came down to doing your homework. Oh well, how about I do an 11th to balance things out? There's a new game plus, which lets you not only carry over power-ups, but also keeps X unlocked with whatever armor pieces you snag for him. Since having a full-powered trio really makes the game a lot better, this is pretty huge. That said though, if you collect all the power-ups, 2 playthroughs will still see you just short of the 36 you need, and that still means that you have to get through the game at least once while it's still playing like crap. So the number of people this will help is severely limited in scope. Probably better to just go back to my suggestion of importing a save file if you can. That's all I can come up with though, so let me know your own tips for having a smoother time with X7. Serious and wrong answers welcome. And be sure to let me know if any of these were helpful, or if there truly is no saving this one. Thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers, especially Mega Man. What am I fighting for?